As my last guest today, I'm talking to Kaisa Kinnunen. You graduated from Aalto in 2010, if I'm not completely wrong. And when you studied at Aalto, how did the faculty approach creativity and conceptual thinking then, and how has that served you in your professional roles?
Well, I consider myself as a bit of an old school student of Aalto. It was back then still called, actually when I graduated, it was already Aalto University, but when I started my studies, it was still University of Arts and Design Helsinki, and the staff was quite different. The approach was quite different. Not a lot of people were going abroad. It was quite closed in a sense. In general, my experiences are that the level of education is very academic. There's a lot of base education on art and of the basis of design. Also shared studies with other departments, which of course is enriching. However, there was back then a little bit of a lack of this actuality of the fashion industry. Of course, in Finland, there is no fashion industry. And the lack of maybe visiting teachers or visiting people from the actual industry was making all the studies a bit hypothetical. Everything was a bit like unrealistic, or I feel like the students weren't sure where they're going and where their future as designers is. And I see a huge change in that when I see the students and their work of today. Then when I did graduate and when I moved to first different places in Europe and then to Paris to work, I saw the difference in the education of people who had studied here in London. First of all, they were way younger than the students graduated from Helsinki. I was 27 when I started to work. All my colleagues were 22 and had the same experience or more experience. So whereas in Finland and in Aalto, we had a lot of basic academic, quite high level studies from art history on. The students here had quite a, I would say, brief, maybe a lot more surface level education, and then their actual work, their actual school was when they got into work placements and started working. So for me and a lot of my peer colleagues from Aalto, we've kind of had to do things in a different rhythm. I don't know which one is better. It's just a different cycle and a different way of learning. But I would definitely say, that also what actually I want to come into one thing that I paid attention to now, having seen graduate collections from Aalto of this year. At Aalto, there's these incredible studios, all access to technical knowledge, very high-tech equipment. You can do all your textiles. And this is what the students of Aalto are kind of known for abroad, that their collections are very made from scratch. They work on their own prints, they work on their own weaves. However, I feel like now that reputation, it already carries itself. And what I found when I looked at the graduate collections, that sometimes the material was at the front, and there was a bit of a lack in the proposal of silhouette or the proposal of the fashion in the garment. So I would propose to students now to trust that people know that we can, and we have that that savoir-faire, and really focus on the fashion part of the clothes in terms of cut, in terms of silhouette.
What would you say is the best way of doing that? Where, like, is it research? Is it like looking for inspiration outside of your studies? How would you strengthen that aspect of people's thinking?
I'm sure the students have that too. It's just that there's this ambition of that textile part and of that material development part, and it kind of eats a little bit from the clothing. I think they have that aspect of their research too. I believe that. Personally, that's the kind of path I guess a lot of the designers go through, looking a lot of vintage, just trying things on yourself or fitting things on a model, opening things, learning about the construction, deconstructing, also in getting inspired by, current fashion or clothing around you, be it sportswear, activewear, and also, personally, I'm kind of I feel like I'm a bit old compared to these young kids. So I really have to look at what kids are wearing, like be it on social media or whatever. And that gives me a completely different view on how to twist things and how people wear these things these days. But the base is vintage, and of course, iconographic research, and I'm sure the students already have that. It's just to put that into full potential. And one, I guess, advice I would say from experience: no research is old research. Really, like whatever research you have, it may seem silly or irrelevant now, but one day it'll be relevant, and you'll be very upset if you don't find it on your hard drive.
That makes sense. Earlier in the seminar, we talked to the director of the Balenciaga Museum about the early days of Balenciaga and where he looked for inspiration. And the other day you told me that Balenciaga will always feel kind of like your personal fashion home. And I was wondering, against that background, what is it about that house that speaks to you?
Well, it's a very sentimental feeling as well, because it was my first real Parisian job, and it's kind of where I got my real education as a designer. And then there's the heritage part. The people of his time, of Cristobal Balenciaga's time, referred to him as the master of the masters, and I totally see where that's coming from. He was a master cutter. He was very avant-garde to his age. You look at the stuff he made in the 60s, 50s. It was completely radical at that time, and and that's where I really learned my métier in a sense, and kind of found my identity as a designer.
What about these days? How do you feed your creativity? How do you maintain a creative outlook? Or is there something that you do if you're feeling a little stuck?
Well, I guess all the things that I mentioned just before, I think for me, the principal way of working is working with vintage. I buy a lot of vintage. I collect a lot of vintage. Sometimes even my own clothes that I buy for myself end up being a source of inspiration later on at another time in another season. I think that's the main source of inspiration. And also when, at this time, of course we are not allowed to travel and do research trips, but at the usual, season, I would go somewhere for research and really take that time to kind of let things, see what I find and what does it bring, what kind of ideas. And then of course, working on a model with that vintage is kind of like a creative process in itself. Also, I said, a lot of sportswear, activewear is a constant source of inspiration, especially in the last few years when, of course, all the houses have been. Last year, everybody was designing luxury sweatpants for the lockdowns, and now it's kind of twisting to what are we designing for the people who are coming out of lockdowns and who want to show up and who want to be seen and who want to be in photos and show their body on a holiday. So it's also a kind of a societal observation constantly. And as I mentioned, also like observations on the youth, and what kind of challenges they are bringing to table and discussions. And and of course then another part is teamwork. So I have a design team, and a lot of my friends are designers, and sometimes you conversations and proposals of other people deblock things that when you cannot get through.
That makes sense. Since you are the last interviewee of this seminar session on creativity, I would love to ask you if you have any advice for the students, especially the ones graduating this year, especially in terms of creativity, of course, since it's been the topic of our day.
I'm a little bit hesitant to give the answer that comes first to mind, because the answer that came first to mind I would like to give to my generation of graduating students. I'm pretty convinced that the students graduating today have a completely different sense of confidence in their vision, in their creativity. When we were graduating, the sense was still a bit, what are we going to bring to the table? What do we know about fashion coming from Finland? Are we at the level? Are we interesting? And of course, if anyone would have those doubts, the answer is no one is going to hire you thinking that you're going to propose the same thing than someone graduating from Paris or Milan or from London. The reason they would hire you is because you come with a unique perspective, and also because you come from a school where you've had access to all of these incredible ateliers and studios and technologies, and if you have applied that to your work. So I'm convinced that the students are more confident now in that vision than my generation was. But then another thing I would say to finish it up is that I think a lot of people are scared that there's no recruitment at the time because of COVID, and how I'm gonna get an internship, how I'm gonna get a job. I've heard from 2 agents recently, or through other people, that there has not been as much recruitment happening in Parisian fashion houses in years. So there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of changes, and it's a good time to apply. It's a good time to get connected and send emails, and really figure out where you wanna be, and just get there.
That's a very uplifting note to end on. Thank you so much, Kaisa, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
And this interview with Kaisa Kinnunen wraps up the Creative Matters part of the Fashion in Helsinki seminar. I'm so glad that you have been able to join me today. I have really enjoyed listening to Sara, Mira, and Anya, and Kaisa, who all shared these nuggets of wisdom about feeding your creativity, following your vision, and getting your projects off the ground. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. Thank you for listening.